We're talking about the different types of nuclear changes. A nuclear change happens to an atom when an atom is, for some reason, at a weird excited state of some sort. There are three types of nuclear changes we can have. There's nuclear fusion, where two small nuclei will join together. Nuclear fission, where one large nucleus will break apart. Or radioactive decay, where a large nucleus will throw out some of its stuff, usually protons or neutrons that are inside of its nucleus. And then it becomes a different element. So for nuclear fusion, that happens with elements that are lighter than iron. Usually like hydrogen or helium are the big examples we think of. That's one of the big things that powers the sun, is that hydrogen, different isotopes or types of hydrogen come together and make helium, and that releases a large amount of energy. That's why there's so much energy from the sun. The two nuclei will combine all of their protons and neutrons together, and sometimes some of those protons and neutrons get knocked off and they have some left over. It becomes a whole new element. So two things become one, kind of like a synthesis reaction. Okay, so here's a nice little animation of this happening. Those are both types of hydrogen because they have one proton. And those two different isotopes come together and it makes a helium plus an extra neutron floating off to the side. If you have questions about that, I can help explain that a little better later. Then we have nuclear fission, which happens to elements that are heavier than iron. Basically, it's the exact opposite. This is where a large atom will lose some combination of its protons and neutrons to become a lighter element. Basically, the atom gets shooken up, and then it breaks into two nearly equally sized atoms that have different amounts of protons and neutrons. So they're one atom of a certain element, an unstable isotope of it, will break apart into two different atoms of different elements. And there's sometimes stuff left over there too. So here's another animation of that. Basically, we excite it by throwing a neutron at it, and then when it gets too excited, it breaks apart. So if you look at this one here, we started with uranium, and we threw a neutron at it, and it broke apart into a krypton and a barium, which are somewhat equal sizes. They're about 50 AMUs different, but the point is they're two totally different things. You notice we had 3 neutrons left over there. We also have radioactive decay, which is kind of similar, but instead of breaking apart into 2 different elements, it'll break apart into a very similar element that's slightly more stable, and then with some extra stuff on the side. So it happens to very large atoms. There are 3 major types of radioactive decay. We have alpha, beta, and gamma decay. Alpha decay is the easiest one to think of. This is just when a very excited isotope, unstable isotope of an atom, loses 2 protons and 2 neutrons together, and that's called an alpha particle, when you have 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Therefore, the atomic number then, since it lost 2 protons, goes down by 2, and the atomic mass goes down by 4 because protons plus neutrons is mass. Beta decay is when an atom that has too many protons or neutrons converts a proton or neutron into the other. So say it's got too many protons, one of those protons will turn into a neutron, but when it does that, it gets rid of some particles off to the side, which we're not going to go into because it gets very complicated. And then gamma decay is when you excite an atom, get an atom that's way too excited and it just has to release some energy. And then that usually releases it in some type of very high energy light particle or photon. That's light energy. It's on the gamma side of our radiation scale. Not harmful at all, but interesting to say the least. So here's some pictures of what goes on. Radioactive decay again. For fission, it breaks apart into 2 different things. And then this one here will decay a little bit and go to the next element down. And this one gets excited and emits some gamma radiation. And that is all.